Sam. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager here at Fairygodboss. And Fairygodboss is the largest career community for women. Our mission is to improve the workplace by increasing transparency. We offer a ton of great free resources like anonymous company reviews, job listings, articles, virtual recruiting events, and so much more to help you succeed throughout your career. Before we get started, we will be taking questions at the end of today's webinar. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to leave questions, and you can leave them as yourself or anonymously, so don't be afraid to ask whatever comes to mind. We're also recording today's webinar, and we will be sending it out in a follow-up email later today. So if you miss anything, you have to hop off early. You'll have the chance to rewatch this, so don't worry about it. Here with me today is Judith Pinto. Judith is an experienced mental health therapist and educator specializing in helping people overcome anxiety and its negative impacts on daily life, work, and relationships. She's worked with children and families for over 25 years, drawing from sensory processing, emotionally focused, and solution-focused approaches to personal growth and development. Thank you so much for being here today, Judith. Over to you.
Thanks, Samantha. It was really actually lovely to meet with you beforehand. I don't know what happened. My screen just went black. I guess it's one of those opportunities to practice what we're going to preach today. So I will take that as a gift anyhow. So as Samantha said, I do specialize actually in anxiety regulation and anxiety management. And it's kind of the theme of what we're going to be talking about today, because one of the things that happens when we're talking about peak performance is something gets in the way from us being able to do the best that we can do, and that is sort of our personal best. So a little bit more sort of a personal background on me and anxiety. You know, I tell people I'm the daughter of an anxious mother, the mother of an anxious child, and I might have a little anxiety myself. So in addition to sort of my work life and learning about anxiety and how to manage it and how to help parents, adults, and children work through anxiety, I have had to sort of navigate that in my own world and in my own family. And not just in sort of a professional context, but even in things that required me to choose career paths. When I was in my late teens and considered, because I studied music, piano for a good portion of my life up to that point, considered a career in music and going on to doing university level studies in music. The thing that I could not get over was the anxiety that went with having to do an audition and that social judgment. And it was therefore not the path that I chose to take, which for better or for worse is where it is. However, it was another venue when I was a little older, in my late 20s, early 30s, for me to actually go back and look at, well, what was that? And how can I work through that? Is there a path to work through that? Because it's the path that I probably need to learn for myself in my own life, help my daughter learn, and frankly, it helps my clients. So with that, essentially this webinar is for women who have experienced being highly skilled, well-practiced, and ready to deliver whatever live performance that matters to them, but something gets in the way, and the performance doesn't end up the way you'd hope for. So if you're looking to find a way to overcome that, this session will be for you. By the end of this webinar, you will have a step-by-step process, and actually there's a handout that'll come out to you after as well, that you can use and customize for your own unique situation, so you can have your next performance, whatever that looks like, be your personal best. So before, let me go here. How do I? Let's take a look at what we're going to talk about. High level view, we're going to talk about what is peak performance. And in that context, how do we talk about self-regulation and self-management in that way? Because we want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. Then we're going to make sure that we're identifying what an ideal state for a particular task actually is. And when I think about state, I'm not talking about states and provinces and territories in a geographic sense. I'm talking about the way you feel, the sensations you have in your body, your intuitive experience, your feelings or emotions, and your thinking, thoughts, the narrative, the story that comes up. So understanding what it's like to identify that state where you are able to do your best for the task that you're setting yourself up to do. And then finding ways, of course, to create that ideal state for that task. Because there's no point in knowing, well, I need to feel like this, I need to think like this, but I have no way how to get there. So I want you to be able to get there by the end of this session. And then I want to also make sure that you have some lifestyle tools in your toolkit so that you know how to be able to do that part as well as you can. Because self-regulation of emotions requires that we are doing well at a really holistic level, physically, emotionally, psychologically, mentally, that we're taking care of our mind and our body. So we're going to leave you with 4 tools to actually get into your ideal state and 4 tools to actually maintain your ability to do that self-regulation. So really, what is peak performance? It's kind of about being in that green zone, about being in a place where we feel safe, safe enough, and safe enough to be brave, frankly, and grounded. Grounded in our knowledge, in our skills, in our abilities, in what we know we can do, and know what we are capable of doing, and willing to be brave enough to go out there and do it in that moment where it counts. So peak performance in this context too is about you being able to do your personal best. So it's not about, well, my best friend Krista, has this way of delivering whole class sessions to classrooms of kids where she uses puppets and she uses all of these things. I'm lousy at doing puppets and presentations that are that playful. Or my friend Rick, who is a great comedian, it's like he gets up there and I can't do that. I can't, but how do I? So I'm obviously less than. No, I bring what I bring to that scenario. I bring a level of skill sets that are mine, and I can only do what's my personal best. I can't become a comedian, I can't become a puppet master, but I can be really playful and I can be really good at exploring stories. And so that's the skill set that I'm going to focus on and develop and bring to those situations. So it depends on, of course, the task, but it's not about comparing yourself with somebody else. It's about comparing yourself with yourself and doing what you are best able to do. So it's based on your skills, your experience, your knowledge, which means you're obviously skilled and experienced and knowledgeable about what you're going to do. It's just about regulating your level of arousal, your state. Never use the word arousal around teenagers when you're trying to explain that, but that's a whole other story. It's about regulating your state, the way you feel physically, emotionally, the thinking that's going on in your body, in your brain, and the feelings that are going on in your body, your gut sense, your intuition. So, before we go kind of too far down that road too, I want to talk about what is self-regulation. Regulation is like a thermostat. If you think about, we all have thermostats in our homes, right? You set the temperature to 20 degrees. If it's warmer than 20 degrees, what you want your heater and your air conditioner to do is to make the right choice. If it's warmer than 20 degrees, you do not want your furnace to kick in. You want your air conditioning to kick in. And if it's cooler than 20 degrees, you don't want your air conditioner to turn on. You want your heater to turn on. And so self-regulation, that's a self-regulatory loop. Your thermostat is a self-regulatory loop. It looks at, here's the goal, here's where we are, what strategy do I need to get back to this goal? And it's about picking the right strategy. So it starts with having a system of being aware and then having tools to get back on track. So that really is how we're going to talk about peak performance. We're going to learn about self-regulation of our emotions and our sensory systems and our intuitive sense and our thoughts. We'll get into a lot more detail about that. So I want you to take a minute because I really do want you to leave with, what can I do? I want you to take a moment And remember a personal best performance that you've had. A time when you've maybe done an interview that has gone really, really well, that you felt really good about during the interview, that you felt good about afterwards, that you didn't beat yourself up about. And maybe the outcome even went well. Maybe you got hired, or maybe they weren't looking for somebody who could tell stories, or they were looking for that puppeteer. Whatever the outcome was, that you felt really good about your performance. Or maybe it was a speech that you delivered, maybe at a wedding, or to a really important meeting or conference. Or maybe it was a really hard conversation that you had with somebody that you cared about, a colleague, a friend, your child, your spouse, your parent. I want you to think about those experiences of you being out there where it's important, it mattered, and you did really well. You felt like you brought yourself to that event and to that experience. When you can get that memory in your head, I want you to take a minute and think about the sensations. And this might be a little tough if this is a long time ago, but if it was recent, hopefully you can, and as you conjure up the memory, hopefully some of those things will come back to you. But I want you to think about the sensations in your body right before, this is important, right before and during that experience. Was your heart racing? Did your hands feel cold and clammy, or were they warm? Were your legs vibrating, or did they feel grounded? Did you feel hot and sweaty and uncomfortable, or did you feel fairly comfortable and at ease? Were you breathing faster? Did you have butterflies in your stomach? What physical sensations did you experience? What was your gut telling you? Was it kind of like, yeah, I got this? Or was it, oh my God, what am I doing here? It's that inner, it's actually your second brain. And more research in neuroscience is showing us that we really do have a gut sense. And that gut is giving us a lot of information about the world around us that we're not picking up at a conscious level, but there's a whole filter that's bringing us either warnings or green lights. So what was your gut telling you before and during? What emotions would you have described yourself as having? Were you excited? Were you scared? Were you a mix of that excitement and fear? And it was kind of like a roller coaster, as opposed to, a movie that you really, a horror show that you didn't really want to be at. Were you worried, invigorated, calm, focused, really content, angry, sad, melancholic? What were you feeling? What emotional word would you use to describe that? And then what were you thinking? That's often what we might call our self-talk. Were you thinking things like, oh, why me? Oh, I wish I could get out of this. Is it too late? Why can't somebody else handle this? Or were you thinking like, wow, this is going to be hard, or this is going to be amazing. I can't believe I get to do this. What were those thoughts? What was the story that was coming up for you before, as you were stepping into what you were doing, and during? So when you've had a chance to just jot down some simple notes about that, I want you to switch gears, and I want you to think about the last important performance that you did, whether it was an interview, a presentation, or a tough conversation with somebody that mattered to you, that didn't go so well, that didn't go as well as you'd hoped for, that while you were doing it, before you stepped into it, you felt uncomfortable. You didn't feel at ease. And maybe rate on a scale of 1 to 10, if that great performance that you did that went really well is your 10, that was your peak. Where on that scale of 1 to 10 would this performance have been? Was it a 5 or 6? Did it feel like a 1? And then go through that same process, and just don't go too deep into this because I don't want you to get stuck here. But, what sensations did you experience? What were you feeling in your body, in your heart rate, and your breathing, and your muscle tension? What was your intuitive sense, your gut? Was it telling you, oh, I'm so not ready for this? And you kind of knew it. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't like, why do I try to do these things? Da, 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 da. It wasn't your inner critic voice coming up, but it was this gut sense of, oh, I so am not ready for this. What feelings were you having? There's some fear, some worry, some anxiety, some distress, some sadness, and maybe there was some euphoria because you just thought, okay, I can get out of this. As soon as it's done, I'll be done. I don't know. And then what were you thinking? Were there thoughts of, I can't believe I'm doing this. I wish I wish the world would open up and just pull me in. When I think about a performance for me that went really well, I took up singing again. And I had this experience of using inadvertently, which is what sort of drew me to study this a bit more, inadvertently choosing a strategy right before a particular performance in a large concert hall. It was my music teacher's very last performance because she was retiring, and I was an adult. My daughter was just 2. We were entering a garage sale because we were moving overseas, and knew I was going to be late, but she was going to, put me in last on the schedule so that whenever I got there, I did, and I got in right on time, and I did the song that we'd set to do, and it went so well. She's like, "Can we do a few more?" And I was so not in my head. I was so in that moment. It was my 10. And then I think about in grade 11 or 12 in high school, this one performance, and it was a piano performance. And I was equally well prepared for it in terms of having practiced, in terms of having a level of skill. And it was being recorded. There was, a few people. It was an adjudicated an adjudicated event anyway. And there were only a few people. It wasn't an auditorium full of people, just a few people. And I was terrified from start to finish. And I remember looking at the video afterwards, and I looked terrified from start to finish. And my hands were cold and clammy, and my legs were vibrating, which made it harder to use the pedal the way I needed to. Just made everything feel awful. So if that first experience was a 10 on my list, this experience was probably like a 3. That piano performance. So, it had a lot to do with what I did and didn't understand about how we step into doing things that are a bit brave. So let's keep going here. Let's define the problem so we know what we're solving for, and then let's talk about the solution. The problem is that our state before we go in is less than ideal. You might have been prepared. You might have been well practiced. Your skills might have been just right for that situation. But you may not have known how to get to that place where body, mind, soul is ready to do your personal best. So the solution is learning to understand state regulation, learning to understand how we get ourselves into that optimal state before we step in. And I'm going to go through a little bit of research with you. The Yerkes-Dodson Law, this is up on the screen here, essentially says that as our level of stress or arousal increases, our performance increases. We get more attentive, we get more interest, but then we get to a peak state where it's like, okay, this is as good as it's going to get. This is the best we can personally do. And then when the stress gets a little too high, we start to slide down in terms of being able to do our best. Our performance gets disrupted by higher levels of anxiety. And you'd think, okay, so I just need to find that peak state. It gets a little more complicated than that. So let's keep going. It depends on the task. If we're doing a really difficult task, if we look at that same performance to arousal or performance level to stress state curve, we need to be slightly less stressed if we're doing something that's hard compared to if we're doing something that's relatively easy for us. So our level of skill is going to vary. If I can play chopsticks really well, I could probably do that at a very high level of anxiety. But if I'm going to sit there at the piano and play Chopin's waltz in C sharp minor, I'm going to have to be a lot calmer to get that done to a point, because a really simple task in a simple context, I could play chopsticks till the cows come home, and I'll be able to do that really well. But the more complicated the task, and I'm going to add context is, the more there's an audience, the more that's on the line with that performance going well, the more stakes we have, the more distractions we have, the more of an audience, people chatting, the harder it's going to be. So yes, there's a curve, but it depends on the task. And oh, I think I went backwards there. All right. This is Yuri Hannon's work. He's a sports psychologist, and he developed the concept of the IZOF, I-Z-O-F, and it's the individualized zone of optimal functioning. And what his research showed in athletes was that each athlete in the same event had a different level of arousal or state that they needed to be in to do their personal best. So for athlete 1, athlete A there on the left, they needed to have a state that they might rate on a 1 to 10 scale or a 1 to 100 scale, possibly between that 50 and 60 mark. Athlete B needed to be between that 40 and 50 to do their personal best. And athlete C needed to be that 30 to 40. So he came up with the idea that it's like there's not a universal curve for everyone. Each person has their own unique curve, and that middle point will vary for the same activity at the same skill level. So these might all be peak performance athletes who are all able to do something at a very high level and at an equal level. But before they step into that activity, to that performance, their level of arousal needs to be at a different state compared to each other. So they need to know what their peak performance state is before they step in to being able to create it. And the key part to his research is that you need to be in that state before you step in to doing what you do. Because the other part that they were able to show is that if people weren't in that ideal state before they began, there was no way that they could get themselves there. It's like, okay, I'm going to be really nervous, but it doesn't work. Often what happens is that those sensations build on feelings of anxiety, and those feelings of anxiety lead to thoughts that are negative and not helpful. And you can try to challenge it, but you're basically trying to do your peak performance, something that you're skilled at, while you're fighting yourself. So until you get out of your own way, pull back that curtain of anxiety and step into your ideal zone before you step into whatever performance state, you're not going to be able to bring your personal best into it. Let's thin slice a little bit more. It depends on the activity. Your individualized zone of optimal functioning also varies by activity. And here's some research, again, in the athletic literature. Target shooting, marathon runners, and cyclists need to have a lower arousal state relative to, if you take them as a group, relative to climbers and people in team sports, relative to people who are sprinters and fighters. And you can sort of see that. There's partly what we also need to look at, and this relates to the next couple of slides that we've got on here, is whether that level of stress is about a cognitive stress or a somatic stress. So we'll take a look at somatic stresses first. Somatic stress really is talking about, what does your body feel like? When you are stressed out, how much of this is a physiological response? And how much of that are you taking into the activity? There's muscle tension, there's an increase in heart rate, there's sweaty palms, or you feel yourself perspiring, and then that leads you to think other thoughts of, oh my gosh, I'm scared, and now you're scared, really. And I've done that when I've gone on stage to do something, and it's like the feeling, the physical feelings of being in a state of stress would trigger emotional responses and would leave me just kind of overwhelmed and not being able to bring my personal best, whatever it was I was doing. Here is the key part. We talked about Yerkes-Dodson Law. It follows somatic stress, physical stress. We need a level of tension in our body, a level of physiological arousal, a heart rate that's a little more elevated, breathing that's a little deeper and faster possibly, to be able to do our peak performance, whatever that level is. But when we get beyond that, somatic stress interferes with peak performance. So there's a just right place of alertness, physical alertness that we need to be in order to do our personal best. Not quite the same with cognitive stress. We'll get to what that chart looks like in just a second. But cognitive stress is when you're holding all of these pieces, the things that you're worrying about. Oh my goodness, what if this doesn't go well? I am so behind on getting all of those other things done. And now I have to do this, and I have this, I'll use my own sort of experience in this moment. I had a really busy week last week with appointments, and there's a ton of paperwork to do, but I'm here. If I start thinking about the paperwork I have to do in this moment, or before I stepped into this conversation with you, I would be a basket case, and that would be me. Because here's how cognitive stress works. We do our best work, our best peak performance, our personal best, when our cognitive anxiety is low, when we're not thinking about all those other things that we are needing to worry about, when we're not thinking about, oh my goodness, this needs to go well. How do I make this go well? When we're able to focus on the moment and the conversation or the communication that we're having, or the performance that we're delivering, whether it's singing, whether it's on stage in theater, whether it's delivering a presentation, whether it's talking to your child about that thing that you really need to figure out how to problem solve. It's because, the worst case scenarios are out there. If you're worrying about the worst case scenarios out there, your performance is declining in that moment. And even though you know how to have those conversations, even though you know how to deliver your personal best perspectives in an interview, on stage, or in a loving conversation, it won't come through. Your personal best won't come through. So where do we begin? Well, let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start, as that song goes. We start by noticing. Just remember when I said I had that experience of running into a crowded auditorium with hundreds of my teachers, supporters, her students and their parents who had worked with her for decades in this community. And here she was, retiring and moving. And there was nothing but potential for me to be terrified of making a complete fool of myself as an adult, stepping onto the stage with her in front of all of these people who adore her, and being the last person and not wanting to disappoint. I mean, there were 1,000 thoughts that I could have taken to go into that rabbit hole, but I was so focused on not wanting to disappoint her in that moment that I had a couple of strategies that I didn't understand at the time. But I started to notice after that experience and went, what happened there? And then I started to actually look into the research on what happened there. How did I show up in that way for her, where I wasn't even scared? I was excited. I was conscious of how amazing this was, but it was just such a moment. And even when I think about it right now, I get this warm, fuzzy feeling, which is lovely. I actually haven't thought about that in a while. But you have to begin by noticing. You have to begin by noticing that, what does a clear road ahead look like for you when it's like, yeah, go. This is, you're on track. And what does it look like when there's a big wall? What does it feel like when there's a big wall that you need to kind of figure out how to dismantle for yourself before you step in? So once you notice what it's like, you need to set some goals. And I know everybody talks about SMART goals, but I'll get to sort of the kind of goals that I really like. First, you need to have a long-term goal. Is this something worth doing? Is it something worth figuring out? I want to learn how to have really hard conversations with important people in my life. I want to learn how to be up on stage and deliver a performance, musical, dance, presentation, public speaking. I want to be able to step into an interview situation and feel like, whether or not they hire me, that I have left them with the best impression of me that I can possibly leave them with. Is that important? So what's my goal? What's the big goal? And so if it is to, be a public speaker, say, And to be able to do that really well, whether it's in your employer's kind of work role or whether it's in some other space, what's your short-term goal for that? What's the next right step? What skill do you need to develop? What skill do you need to hone so that you can do your personal best and you can up level that skill? And to what level? Is it to deliver, a half-hour webinar? Is it to be able to record yourself half an hour live first take and have it be what you're happy with and it's your personal best? And then from there, you come out with a behavior and situation goal. I call this a behavior and situation goal. It comes from the self-management literature about how we learn to take charge of and experiment with our own growth and learning. So behavior and situation goals, I use the acronym SPORTY. They're specific, they're positive, which means we want to put something on there that we want to see more of, not what we want to see less of. They're observable, which means somebody should be able to see you actually doing it or hear you doing it. There's an evidence that, yeah, you're doing that. I can vouch to that. They're realistic. You can actually do it. If you want to, flap your wings and learn to fly, that's probably not realistic. So make sure it's realistic, grounded in reality and in, what objective reality. It's timed. So there's either a duration or a frequency or a sequence. In some way, there's a temporal measure. You're timing this and it's yours. That's the why in Sporty for me. It has to matter to you, because if it doesn't matter to you, you're not going to put in this kind of effort. So if it matters, it's a sporty goal. If it's just a sport goal, you're not going to have the interest to follow through. So just be realistic about that too. The other piece that you need to do is you need to monitor. You need to have a notebook and you need to take notes. I learned this process when I took a course in self-management, and I picked performing on stage as my goal. And so I learned to actually break down, how could I do this? I wanted to sing jazz. I'd never sung jazz. I was always in classical. But my classical voice teacher, not the one I spoke about earlier, but the next one, she passed away very suddenly. And I was left sort of in this place of being unable to sing the songs that I sang with her, without just sort of breaking down and sobbing, because it just was so unfair. There was so much that, there was all of the narrative of grief. But I still wanted to sing because it was a meaningful thing for me. So I thought, okay, there's a jazz teacher who's really, really hip. So not anything related to classical voice, but I signed up and I wanted to get to that place again where I could actually do and be good at it. So I actually signed up for a self-management course, a graduate level course, and I used the modules, the multiple group training sessions that this particular voice teacher offered to learn how to manage my anxiety so that I could get out there and do my personal best, so that I could have that experience like I'd had before in classical voice situation in this jazz world. So you have to keep notes, because you have to give yourself information to build a toolkit of things that work for you and pick the thing that works the best so that you can choose it when the chips are down and you can get yourself in that last 5 minutes before you step into an important situation, and you can deliver your best. Here are 4 things that the research shows us helps us regulate. But the research can show us that, medication A works 50% of the time. If you're one of the 50% it doesn't work for your specific situation and your neurobiology, it's not going to work for you. So yes, mindfulness, meditation, relaxation practices, progressive muscle relaxation, visualization, autogenics. These are all different forms of mindfulness practice and relaxation practice. And they're slightly different, but in terms of headings, mindfulness and meditation versus relaxation. However, you've got to find the right one for you. The one that gets you into your ideal zone of optimal functioning, gets your body into the state that it needs to be, alert enough, but not too alert and overwhelmed. Your thinking into the ideal state it needs to be for that task, calm enough, and not distracted so that you can actually get ideas and thoughts across. If you're running a sprint, you probably want a lot of physical energy. But if you're delivering a presentation, you're probably not running around the room. So you definitely want a lower level of physical energy. It's important for you to try out meditation, mindfulness, progressive muscle relaxation, visualization, whatever relaxation technique that you can think of, or that you can Google it on online. You can check YouTube videos. They have lots of them. Lots of people have different scripts, music for. Find one that you can use. And you're going to put this into your self-experimental toolkit. And I'll explain how we're going to use that. Here's a second strategy though. Exercise, physical exercise, going for a walk, going for a run, doing yoga, doing calisthenics, push-ups, sit-ups, squats. Physical activity helps to regulate, again, thermostat. It's one of those tools. It's either a furnace or an air conditioner. So meditation is one of those tools. Exercise is a second tool. Third tool is connecting with others. And this one is actually, I hadn't sent this in, but I will send this in to you so that you don't have to necessarily try to write this down really quick. But it's called a social resource inventory. So even if you don't have somebody that you can connect with, that you can have a positive interaction with. And I had a lovely chat with Samantha beforehand. So it was a perfect regulating tool for me to be able to step in. But if there's nobody that you can talk to and you're kind of in your own space, think about somebody you respect, who cares about you, who knows you well, who you know well, and answer these following 4 questions. What do I respect about this person? What does this person respect about me? What does this person do to be supportive? And how do I feel when I haven't seen this person for a while and then we get to see each other again? And remember those answers to those questions. Social resource inventory helps. Again, it's one of your tools. It's either a heater or an air conditioner. And the 4th tool, gratitude. Stop and think for 5 minutes, things that you're grateful for, and just really center yourself in those pieces of the gift that is, whether it's, I'm grateful for Samantha having been able to take a few minutes in her busy day in her life to be able to connect with me ahead of time and make sure that the technology works. And then I went black on the screen, but that's okay, because I remembered that Samantha was out there and I could reach out again and we could reconnect. And I'm so grateful to be able to be here and to be able to share this, because this is almost a large chunk of my life's work in the journey that I've been on. And I'm so grateful to be able to share this with you today. So to think about the things that you're grateful for. I'm grateful for my family, my pets, the fact that I have the internet to be able to, in a pandemic, reach out to people wherever you are. I'm looking out my window at a very, very snowy scene. It looks very Christmassy here, but the sun is shining and the sky is blue. Having things that you feel grateful for to get you into your individualized zone. Now you're going to have to try these things to figure out which of them work for you best to get yourself into your individualized zone of optimal functioning before the kind of task that you do. So when you think about that peak performance that you had described, the thing that was a 10 for you, was there something that was the precursor that happened right before that were either encouraging words from somebody or remembering what a gift it was? Was there some gratitude? Was there something that you had to do? Let me tell you what my thing was before that peak performance, when I showed up in front of this large auditorium and unexpectedly gave my peak performance, unintentionally. I ran from the far end of a parking lot to try to get there on time because it was the only place I could park. And I literally ran 5 minutes to get there into this auditorium. And it was so important to me to do the right thing and to show up for this person that I cared about for her very final performance as a teacher. So there's a social component to that. And of course, the running is physical exercise. There's a social resource piece to that. And I think being really, really focused on her and what I wanted to do for her. So there's that other piece that was social. And of course, when you're breathing and you're running really hard and then you're trying to control your breath because you have to sing, you start to actually do a breathing meditation to get your breathing back into control. So I probably did 3 out of those, if maybe not even 4. So was there something that was a precursor to that event for you? Now, 4 things to build your long-term toolkit, because if you are always, if your baseline stress level is up to here and you need to be here in those moments in the state, if your trait is up here, I live here, but I need to be here. We need to get you overall lower. Getting physical exercise, preferably with friends, but if not, in a socially isolated pandemic world that we're in at the moment, get that physical exercise and that activity in any way you can on a regular basis. Your body needs it, your brain needs it. Get a good night's sleep. Sleep is so important to learning. And if you're working on learning new skills, you need to sleep. You need REM sleep to master motor skills. You need deep sleep to master cognitive learning and verbal learning. So if you can practice your presentation all you want, but if you haven't had a good night's sleep, it's not going to go as well as you could have had it go, even if you use something right before to get into that space. Good nutrition. It's fuel for your body. You wouldn't put diesel into your gas engine and you wouldn't put gas into your diesel engine. Get good food for you. And have good relationships, because it's really hard to come up with a social resource inventory if you haven't had some opportunities to have those social resources. I know if people are isolating more, get on the phone, hear somebody's voice. You know that a voice can give you all kinds of information about the quality of your relationship with them and how much you mean to them. Get on the phone and be that person for somebody else too. Find ways to connect. And at this point, I'm just going to open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Judith. That was a great presentation. And thank you to everybody who sat with us for the past 45 minutes. We are going to start taking audience questions now. I saw some come through in the chat, but I'd encourage you to use the Q&A. That's where I'm going to be looking for your questions. So with that, let's jump into it. I did see one, though, in the chat that I want to bring up with you, Judith.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for meditation or mindfulness apps? Podcasts, people on YouTube that you like? Do you have any recommendations there?
And it varies. There are some great scripts online. This is the piece where you do have to customize, right? I'm trying to remember the name of the one app that I actually really love for meditation. It's the Waking Up app by Sam Harris, I think, who developed it. And I like it because there's I think a 30 or 40-day course to start out with. You can get a free trial for 2 months. So it allows you to try like 10-minute meditations every day. And so ideally, if you can do this, take 5 or 10 minutes, if meditation gets you into your ideal zone, that's a really nice way to get some scripts under your belt. So right before you step in, you're in your zone and you can do what you can do. There are also great, I love also progressive muscle relaxation, because it's a process of tension and release of muscles that allows you, when you get into a state that's in your somatic excess and your muscles are going to tighten. And when you practice it on a regular basis, the minute your muscles get tighter, it actually triggers a relaxation response. And it's like it turns on your air conditioner because you're getting more stressed. So there are some great, the thing with any of the other, apps and podcasts and things is you have to like the voice that you hear. Because when you're trying to get relaxed, and say somebody has a bit more of a gravelly voice or a higher pitched voice, or they're a little too chipper, or they're a little too low, and it's signaling threat to you, those won't be right for you. You got to tune into your gut. Just because I tell you this is a great tool, for you it might be like, this is grating. So pick something that when you listen to it, because it's the vocal that has to be the most important, because you can close your eyes, but you can't shut your ears because you need that information.
Yeah.
Pick a voice and a sound that feels like it's doing the right thing for you and moving you to that place that you need to be in.
Yeah, that's a great point. It could be the most relaxing script in the world, but if who is it, Janet from Friends, is probably speaking, it might not be so relaxed
That's
there.
right. That's a perfect example.
Yeah, always my go-to. This question came through from a bunch of people. Can you repeat the acronym SPORTY and what each letter stands
Yes.
for? Can you walk us through that one more time?
Specific. So make sure it's specific. So for example, what I did with my behavior and situation goal when I was trying to figure out how do I get myself into the right place before I go up on stage and sing. Specifically, I am going to practice 10 minutes of mindfulness meditation before I go into my rehearsal every day. And I'm going to do 10 minutes of vocal warm-ups, and I'm going to do a half an hour of going through my a set list. I'm going to wear clothes that I might wear on stage. I'm going to wear shoes that I might wear on stage because they're going to pinch, and I need to figure out how to deal with that. So as specific a context as possible and as specific a behavior as possible. Positive, it's what you want to do as opposed to, and I don't, so I want to decrease the errors. No, I want to increase my comfort level. So I'm going to take a measure of how do I feel in this moment going in? How do I feel after I've finished this practice session? So positive, I want to see growth. I want to see more of this as opposed to what I want to see less of. Observable, meaning I am getting dressed up in my clothes that I might wear on stage. I am wearing the pinchy shoes. I am taking that 10 minutes to meditate. Somebody walking by, not that they would, but would be able to see me do that. I am doing 10 minutes of vocal warm-ups. I am doing a 30-minute set. It's realistic that I have a space that I can do it. And for a while it wasn't realistic for me because I had my music room upstairs, and my daughter needed to be in bed by the time I could get her on. So I had to move that into the basement so that I could still do what I needed to do and she could sleep. So it needed to be a realistic thing that I could do. It was timed. I was planning to do it every day. So 30 minutes every day. And I'm measuring meditation for 2 weeks. The next 2 weeks, I'm going to measure how physical exercise, push-ups, sit-ups, and squats, 10 of each in a row or 20 of each in a row, how that impacts. And then I'm going to compare the data. I'm going to look at number crunching. So it's timed and it's meaningful for me. I probably wouldn't have had the interest to figure out how to do that if somebody had said, well, let's figure out how to get you to be able to sprint and do the 100-meter. And you're like, yeah, no, I'll probably break something. But thanks for letting me know, right? It has to be relevant and meaningful. It has to be yours. And the more meaningful it is, the more likely you're going to stick with that plan. The thing I would also suggest, which I forgot to mention, is give yourself a treat at the end. So, okay, when I do 10 days of this trial and I take the data so I can compare, yes, I did feel better after doing this and I did do better. I felt better about the performance. I felt like I made fewer mistakes. I felt grounded. I'm going to treat myself. And for me, that was something fattening at Starbucks. So.
I mean, I feel you on that. I think
Yeah.
the minute you said treat, I was like, oh, I need some ice cream.
Exactly.
Awesome. I like this question here. It's from an anonymous attendee. They asked, how do you know when something is your gut intelligence versus not your gut intelligence or something else?
Yeah. And that's where anxiety and my daughter asks me this all the time because I said I'm daughter of an anxious mother of an anxious child. She asks, well, it's like, how do I know that this isn't actually, just me worrying or this is me knowing? And that takes some practice. That takes getting quiet and asking that inner wisdom that you have once you learn to trust it. Because we've all been in situations, we've all been in situations where you're stepping into something and you're saying yes to something and you're thinking, oh, and you talk yourself out of it. You go, oh, this is just anxiety. We're just gonna, of course I don't want to do it. It's kind of hard. And once you've stepped in, you're going, why did I do this? I knew it. And learning to make that discernment is really a process of getting quiet and taking the time to listen to yourself. One of the things that I do in my mental health practice is I work doing sound play therapy, which is not, but it's a play-based approach where it's just completely about you tuning into not the words, but the images that you create. So if that could be just doodle, get out of your head, take, ask yourself a question, put it away. Is this the right thing? Is this what do I need? What do I want? Is this the right thing? And create something. Put the idea, the question off the table, create something, do a collage, do art, do something playful that you can then see, and then say, what does this need to tell me about my question that I asked? And learn to tune in really deeply to your inner wisdom, because it's there. And we sometimes let our head get in the way of listening.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point, but that brings me into a really interesting question that I think Aisha, apologies if I got your name wrong, but Aisha asked here, how do you manage impromptu or unplanned events? So let's say your boss is saying, oh, I want to meet with you in 15 minutes, and maybe you don't have that time that you need. How do you get into that headspace?
Well, and that's that piece. If you've got that 15 minutes, if you've done the experiments on yourself to figure out what do you need to do to be in your just right, because you're not going to be able to upskill in that moment, right? This is not the time to go off and practice how to have an interview. This is not the time to go off and practice how to deliver a presentation, or how to use Zoom, or how to use PowerPoint, or this is not a time that you can upskill. This is a time, if you have practiced being mindful about the things that help you get into your ideal zone of optimal functioning, to do what gets you into your ideal zone. Some other things that you could add is journaling. The journaling piece sometimes can be a bit of a wild train, because you can go down the negative path that takes you into a stressed out place. It becomes very, very, again, words in your head and not necessarily attending to your gut and your body. So I specifically kept journaling off the list, because it depends on whether it can be helpful. But if you know that a 5-minute mindfulness practice can help you, go find a bathroom. Nobody's going to bug you in there, hopefully, and do a 5-minute practice. And you can do your personal best. It's not about doing better than somebody else in the adjacent office, but you will bring your personal best to that conversation.
Perfect. An anonymous attendee here wants to know, what do you do when you've made a small mistake that you fear might become a bigger mistake, but it also could go unnoticed? So you're dealing with this anxiety of, I made a small mistake and oh my goodness, this could be really bad, or it could be nothing. How do you cope with those emotions?
Well, actually, one of the handouts that I sent you this morning, it's called Levers, will guide you through that piece. You need to work through the feeling first before you can think about the solution. Feelings they don't come out of nowhere. Feelings come from either sensations we have, an intuitive kind of sense we get, a thought that we have, or something that somebody said. It comes to us. It's triggered by something. So if you've had this, it's like, oh no, I did. What feeling comes to you? What does your body feel like in that moment? What's the emotion? What's the word you can describe that with? So, label that, engage with that, and going, wow, I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling embarrassed. I'm feeling a little guilty, ashamed maybe. And then figure out, what does that feeling need from you? How can you go, well, of course I'm feeling this way. Actually back up. Validate that feeling. Of course I'm feeling this way, because this is what happened. This is what happens when this happens. This is how we feel when these kinds of things happen. Now, what does this feeling tell me I need? It tells me I need somebody safe to talk to. It tells me I need some way to figure out how to problem solve this. It tells me I need. What does it need? If I'm sad, it tells me I need to reach out and have some connection with somebody, and maybe a shoulder to cry on. If I'm angry, I might need to reach out to somebody to vent. If I am just delighted and thrilled, it might still mean that I need to go for a run so that I can discharge all of this excitement, so that I can then have a focused conversation to tell somebody why I feel that way. But then meet that need. Do what your feeling needs you to do to work through it and to feel safe with it. And then figure out, problem solve what kind of might be happening there. And again, leading into your gut of like, well, what should I do? What's the right thing to do? What's right for me in this moment? How do I deal with this problem? And nobody can give you the what should you do. That comes from that, again, inner wisdom, once you've worked through the dark night of the feeling.
Perfect. And then I see we have just a minute more, so I'm going to get to one last question that a few people asked. It's kind of, do you have any home remedies for a good night's sleep? It seems a lot of people have trouble falling asleep at night, and they've tried the mindfulness, they've tried all those things, but it's not working. Their brain is still going crazy.
Running.
So do you have any, other tips, other things they can try and maybe look out for?
There actually, I have a I don't know if this is okay. I have on my website, there's a free resource for adults and improving sleep on there. And it's a PDF. It will get, once I upload it, an interview as well, conversation that I had with a nutritionist about it. So that video will also be available for download if that's okay to offer.
Yeah, of course.
And it really talks about lifestyle strategies, right? Because sleep doesn't happen. Sleep, unlike peak performance, if you haven't been sleeping well, you're not going to 5 minutes before get yourself sleeping at your best. You do need to have everything that you do in the day lead up to that. So it talks about exercise and fitness and social engagement and purposeful, meaningful activities and all of the other things that are in the literature and the research shown to have a beneficial impact on getting a good night's sleep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Judith, for your time with us today and for answering all these questions. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. Judith, I'm going to let you finish up with any last words you might have.
I really want to thank you for having me present today. I really enjoyed this, and I'm hoping that the information is helpful. I've got I'm going to send you a couple more quick tip sheets to go. I'll cover the sporty and the other, which I do have written down here, so that people have access to it. And thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us. I hope it was helpful.
Awesome. Well, look out for the recording in your inbox later, as well as those worksheets that Judith mentioned. And we will catch you at the next webinar. Have a great rest of your day and your week. Bye.